Ava here, who's from Relph, which I did have on my notes what that stood for. The Regional Environmental Centre for Central and Eastern Europe. Correct. Yes, and she's the lead on one of the work packages on ClairCity. We've got Andy Edwards from Bristol City Council here. Bristol City Council also involved on the project as a Bristol partner. We've got Enda Hayes, who you've probably seen upstairs, outside, who's the technical director on the project. And then we've got Joe Barnes, who we met you downstairs, who's leading on the Delphi engagement aspects of the project. And then we've got Cora Bouchel at the back, who's filming with a camera. If anybody, I don't know if Cora's mentioned, but if anybody has an issue with being photographed or caught on camera, then raise your hand and we'll make sure that doesn't happen. But this session we mainly focused on the speakers at the front, so there won't be any moving around the camera. And is Peter here? Peter?
No.
Right.
Unfortunately, he couldn't come today,
Yeah.
so, but I will inform him about
Yes.
the splendid event.
And I think at some point Laura Fogg-Rogers, who also works at UWE, the Science Communication Unit with Cora, might be joining us as an observer. And also I'd like to thank the Bristol City Council Partnership firstly, who helped with inviting people and arranging people on here, particularly Claire, Jacob, and also Tom Haynes, who's an intern currently at the partnership, and he very kindly came and helped me arrange the route yesterday. I'd also like to thank Low Carbon Southwest, Matt Brock, who also included an advert for the event in the newsletter, and Mark Legion, Bristol City Council as well, who was involved in some of the early organisation. Just some quick housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if one happens, the quickest way to leave will be out through the doors where you came in and down the stairs, and then you're at the back exits. Toilets are just outside the door. You do need a swipe card to access, but there should be people around to let you back in when you do go out. Great, so I'll just start by going over the project and talking about ClairCity. It's a big EU project over 4 years. There's lots of different partners. There's 6 different city regions involved. And the main ClairCity concept is challenging the debate around air pollution and emissions, which largely focuses on where and what the emissions are. So what's the boundary that they cover, and what are the different types of emissions, and what are the technologies that cause those emissions, are they from cars? It's challenging that debate and focusing more on who and why. So what activities that people are doing are causing these emissions, and why can't they do anything to change that? So that's where the debate is from. That's the ClairCity concept. We're going to be hearing more about air pollution and health impacts on transport, but air pollution is a significant problem. These are just some of the health impacts that are linked to air pollution. So it's linked to heart attacks, strokes, heart disease, lung cancer, and COPD, amongst other conditions. And tiny particles get into the bloodstream and move to organs around the body. And then there's growing emerging evidence about links to other health impacts such as type 2 diabetes, dementia, and autism. So research is kind of ongoing in those areas. So it's a big problem. So ClairCity is aimed at creating a major shift in public understanding towards the causes of poor air quality, and looking at how to involve citizens to give their opinions on air pollution, so we can start to focus on who and why we have air pollution, rather than just focusing on, yes, we have air pollution, and we know what the causes are, but how can we actually do something about it? So the ClairCity objectives. about putting system behaviour and practice at the heart of the debate, developing a suite of innovative toolkits to enhance quantification, engagement, and impact evaluation, integrating system behaviour into city policy, which is sort of the game that the Delphi engagement process is going on at the moment, and then raising awareness of environment changes and their solutions. So as I said, there's 6 different pilot city regions which have been selected because they have different problems with regards to air pollution. So we have Bristol, Amsterdam in Holland, the Aveiro region in Portugal, Ljubljana in Slovenia, Liguria region in Italy, and Sosnowiec, is that okay? in Poland. So they have different issues. In Bristol, the problem with air pollution is largely around transport and air pollution from transport stations. So, why we're here today? The key message for ClairCity is that we'll only change the way people behave if we change the social arena in which they do things. And part of that social arena is the organisations across the city and how people interact with those. So how people travel to work, how they get their shopping, how they get their food, how they interact with civil society. So this requires looking at more than just individuals and understanding and addressing how the physical and social context of the city shapes their day-to-day lives. So maybe the most important behaviour to change is not that of individual systems, but the policy makers, air quality managers and other experts. So the ClairCity approach has this phase 1, which is establishing baseline evidence around data from the different cities. And then moving into phase 2, which is the phase we're in now, which is with the citizen and stakeholder engagement. So this is the stakeholder engagement aspect, looking at how to open up a dialogue with stakeholders. Joe Barnes, who is here at the moment, is currently leading on the citizen engagement aspects as well, and these both combine and lead into the 3rd phase, which is scenario analysis, results and dissemination. So, why we're here today, obviously this is part of a stakeholder engagement activity, but what is a mutual learning shop? What are we expecting from today? It's easier to start with what a mutual learning workshop isn't. It's not an expert workshop, though we are going to carry a panel session soon with some experts talking. The main focus of the event is that there's a shared communication between people, rather than experts sort of sharing their opinion. We are receiving sort of feedback. It's also not a traditional Delphi workshop, though Joe would argue that hers isn't either. But a traditional Delphi workshop looks at achieving a consensus, and we're not trying to achieve a consensus of opinion amongst you, we want to get everybody's different opinions. And is it a scenario workshop? Well, we are going to be looking at scenarios, but the scenario is less of the aim of the workshop and more of a way of getting some actions and some feedback from you on the challenges and barriers that you face. So yes and no. So it's a chance to share knowledge and learning about how to achieve a clean air, healthy, zero carbon Bristol. So the aim of today is to develop routes to a clean air, healthy, zero carbon Bristol by 2050 by understanding specific challenges and opportunities for organisations and engaging them to identify actions, milestones and priorities. And this will feed into a variety of different outputs that are going to come out of the project. But yes, largely around policy and the policy package for the council. So yes, just briefly, and I will stop talking in a minute. But the outline for the day, the welcome and outline. We're going to move into a panel session with our keynote speakers, which will run for about half an hour, and then there'll be time for question and answer session. And then we move into sort of the proper mutual learning. We'll move back next door, and we'll be looking at creating some strategies and visions, and hearing from you about the different challenges and opportunities for you with representatives of different organisations around the city. Okay? So yes, I will invite Graham Parkhurst can speak first. I'm sure lots of you know who Graham is, but he's a professor in the Centre for Transport and Society at UWE in the arts and
Must be me. Okay, so I think it's a really important project. I've been working in this sector for more than 25 years. It seems to me, in terms of developing citizen engagement around this topic, we've scarcely moved forward. So I'm really pleased to be able to collaborate with my colleagues. So, I don't remember a time when there's been so much reliance placed in the transport sector on technological change. So that's what I thought I would focus on today, and try to give a critical view of one of the 4 key themes in what is being seen as a transition in the mobility sector. And those are electrification, automation and interconnection of connected vehicles, much more flexible supply and flexible user choice, and more sharing vehicles. So I'm going to spend, I think, perhaps most of the time, or a disproportionate amount of the time, on electrification, because that's the one that's, I think, probably most advanced in terms of the shift, and the European Union is actually placing an enormous amount of emphasis on this. European Union policy is that by 2050, all of urban transport, indeed most of transport itself, except perhaps aviation, must be electrically powered. Huge goal. Related to that is another immense goal, which is that 50% of journeys, freight movement, should be carried on some form of rail system. So the extent of that ambition is enormous. Therefore, this chart actually very much concerns me. This basically reports European Union policy, which is to accept, permit, allow, encourage, choose your verb, a doubling in transport demand over the next 30 odd years, whilst at the same time achieving the climate change targets of almost eliminating carbon from the transport system. I think most sensible people, not constrained by great political problems, would say you wouldn't start trying to reduce your major gaseous output by allowing a doubling in demand at the same time. What they're hoping, of course, is that they can follow the more solid line at the bottom, passenger freight here, by actually reducing energy demand at the same time. And electrification is a key part of that. And clearly this relates strongly to air quality as well. So we start from a picture of a great challenge, and I think you could say it's a policy disconnect. So what would electrification do for us? Well, it depends which set of automotive engineers you listen to. This is an interesting analysis from a German Professor Helmers, who was looking at whether it's better to actually replace all the vehicles because they have very high embodied carbon, or indeed to convert them. And he argues that actually just even converting existing vehicles to electrification is still worth it in carbon terms. But a new battery electric vehicle does deliver life cycle improvements over an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. But let's note, it's not an absolute step change, it's 30-40%, and those figures seem to be repeated across other studies. But when I produced this chart a few months ago, we had about 50 publicly available charging points. It's probably gone up a bit now. Let's say it's doubled, let's say it's 100. That still means we only have 1 per 5,000 vehicles in the Bristol area. And it will be a huge challenge, and I'm not quite clear who's going to fund this. There have been obviously major public sector projects, and even if we did provide all these, compared with the petrol filling station network, there are about 10,000 of those in the country, just a little bit less. That's enough to refuel our entire car fleet of 30 million vehicles. Yeah? How long do you have to spend charging? Okay, Tesla are bringing it down, but it's still minutes, hours. It's not seconds, minutes. So there is a massive issue around recharging that we're not really facing up to. This is the kind of scenario we need to deal with. How can the public sector allow charging points to be built in the street? Maybe they can. It's amazing we allow parking like this in the first place. But actually to condone that approach to parking, would that be acceptable? Which you would in fact be doing if you provided all these vehicles with charging facilities at home. Lots of people are talking about citizen innovation at the moment, a wonderful thing. And indeed, citizen innovation is a wonderful thing. And all the time it's the odd eccentric, I think that's probably fine. And yes, obviously some care taken there. But do we really want to replicate this across all of our Victorian streets? So, major unsolved questions here. Where are we getting our carbon neutral electricity from? It could be nuclear. There's a Professor Turner at the University of Bath. I have to say he's not an electric car fan, but he managed to produce a calculation that we need 51 new nuclear power stations to fuel the car fleet. That's essentially because if you look at the current energy demand in the transport sector, it's about 150% of electricity production. So we'd have to increase electricity production by 2.5 times and manage to connect that all around the national grid, which doesn't have the infrastructure. That might be 100 billion to upgrade. So a massive, massive task. He's probably exaggerating a bit with the 51 nuclear power stations, but it is a major exercise. Then we need to have all the necessary raw materials for the electric vehicles. Users are going to have to change their acceptance of vehicle costs, I guess, unless there really is a push down on costs by the manufacturers. That may or may not happen. It mainly depends on battery cost. And then we have to watch out for rebound effects, depending on what happens in terms of road pricing going forward. And maybe that's something to reconsider in your scenario discussions around how could we possibly allow a very low user charge per mile into the future without charging people for using the roads. We lose essentially the few controls we've got. So that's electric vehicles. Connected autonomous vehicles. I'm not going to spend so long on this because I actually think they're probably quite a long way away in many ways. Well, connected vehicles are nearer to us and there are some benefits there. I think these are the order of 10% benefits. They're not revolutionary. So connected vehicles, essentially, if the public allow it, if the manufacturers allow it, and if the technology is brought forward, enable vehicles to communicate with each other and with a central control system. So they could still be human-driven, but ultimately it makes more sense if they would be autonomously driven. But it would enable optimization of use of the roads. So you would stop at red traffic lights, the vehicle would slow down, so by the time you arrive there it becomes green. Of course, there are always limits to these technical optimization possibilities, but some benefits can be obtained. Fully autonomous vehicles, probably only around 3% by 2030 according to KPMG. They have no particular interest in making that a long time scale because they're doing this work essentially to analyse the benefits to UK PLC. Other people saying it could be further away. Not going to go into the detail of that, but maybe not for another century. We can get to the ultimate, go everywhere, anytime. And if you look at some images from the highway code and similar, there are all kinds of problems that need solving. Here's a motorcyclist hidden from view of the sensor. Unless that motorcyclist is actively broadcasting, I'm here, what's to stop that manoeuvre overtaking too late for the autonomous vehicle pulling out to see it? And a particular issue around overtaking cyclists. If we actually all followed the highway code now, then Gloucester Road would cease to function. Gloucester Road is one of the most constrained roads in Bristol, with 30% of the flow is cyclists on it, and many other vehicles are buses. When an autonomous vehicle system has to deal with that, it cannot break the law. It will have to observe whatever rule has been written into it, which presumably ought to reflect the highway code. So either the highway code gets changed and we allow a shorter passing distance, or we need to rethink how we use our roads. So some major issues ahead. Not to say that the government isn't highly enthusiastic about this, at least in 2015 it was highly enthusiastic. That may have sobered a little bit now, I think. You only get all these benefits, by the way, if you move to complete level 5 automation. That means the vehicle, you could send your 10-year-old child out in it and be confident they would arrive safe and sound. So those are the kinds of questions. I think I've probably covered those. I'm going to move on. So lastly, I'm going to look at the issues of flexible supply and sharing. So sharing is a wonderful word. It sounds cuddly and nice. It's something we all ought to do if we're socially minded citizens. But we need to be very clear that there's a difference between asynchronous and synchronous sharing, i.e. are you sharing a vehicle that somebody else has used a few minutes ago and effectively you've privatised it for your own use now, or are you actually sharing it for the journey, which is much more desirable in terms of managing traffic down and reducing emissions. So, big distinction in between, say, Uber and Uber Pool. Uber Pool is the variant where you will share the vehicle with somebody else if somebody else wants to travel in the same direction. Big uncertainties about these shifts at the moment. Uber will claim that many of their trips are co-located at one end of the journey with a public transport system. And they jump to the conclusion, or allow others to jump to the conclusion, that means those people are interchanging from public transport. It could just be that London tube stations are located near key nodes of activity, and therefore, if you measure people's trips from there, they may not have come from the underground, they may have come from other locations. But nonetheless, this is very interesting, and potentially, if we could promote these more shared modes, there's a lot of benefit here. Uber are claiming, I think this is probably a more interesting result, that 50% of the trips in downtown San Francisco, 50% of the trips there are actually offered, requested in Uber Pool mode. So some sense there that people are willing to share. So massive rise in car sharing clubs, those can be very beneficial. And of course, if we were using car sharing, then that makes the problem of refueling and recharging all those electric vehicles rather easier. Although let's not get carried away, we're still going to see peaking in demand. You still need enough vehicles around to cope with the peaks, unless we foresee some major change in that. Bike sharing as well. There's been a huge enthusiasm around. Some quite impressive figures in some cities, up to 20% of trips made by bike sharing coming from car. However, absolute terms still quite small. I think it's very interesting to see the development of the new bike sharing scheme here, and we would love to do some evaluation on it. So this again is another part of the picture that might reinforce cycling. One of the benefits of bike sharing schemes is it encourages people who have bikes at home to get them out and use them. So my last item is around shared taxi services, which may or may not be autonomous, which may or may not be electrically powered, but they could be. And really, new forms of demand analysis are emerging whereby, rather than deciding bus routes, advertising them and hoping people come to use them, what we could do is actually allow organically routes to shift. So it's not completely a free-for-all in terms of origin and destination, but you optimise by picking a route that emerges over time according to revealed demands. So will these actually be shared, these vehicles? If they're autonomous taxis, well, we've been doing some surveys in Bristol just now, and I guess the kind of good news is that about 50% of people said they would share a taxi or share a bus. Varies a bit, but when we asked people what their actual preference was for future travel, and they wanted a normal car, i.e. one they own, sitting on their front drive or parked outside their home. 2/3 of people went for that. All this fuss around automation is rather neither here nor there. Now, what people tell you now, what they'll actually do in 20, 30 years, of course, are rather different things, but at the moment, that seems to be the attitude. So I would say the future scenario needs to really focus these items. We need to avoid that doubling in demand. We need to strongly incentivise shared mobility, particularly synchronous sharing, not asynchronous. We do need to electrify the vehicle fleet, but we must recognise that this is a massive challenge and we have to make it easier for ourselves. Connected vehicles are a good thing because they'll allow perhaps a 10% improvement. I don't have any strong evidence base for that, just a few emerging studies, but it's that order of magnitude I would suggest. So thank you very much. I hope we have a good discussion today.
Yes, thank you, Graham. Now we've got David Relph from Bristol Health Partners.
That's right, yeah.
Who's going to say a few words about health inequality.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I just want to say a very few brief words about Bristol Health Partners, which is a local partnership between a number of NHS organisations, including the hospital trusts and the commission groups in Bristol, both universities, University of West of England and the University of Bristol and Bristol City Council. We're focused on collaboration and facilitating collaboration both within those organisations, but also creating work that the public can get involved in and other kind of interested third parties. And we've got a mechanism by which we do that called the Health Integration Team. We look after 20 of those, including one that Adrian is part of, which you may want to hear about later on. We're particularly interested in facilitating research translation, so trying to draw on the capabilities and expertise within both universities in order to solve problems that will make a difference locally. I want to talk actually in quite general terms about some of the kind of policy making issues. Of course, there is a health impact to poor air quality. I'm not an expert in that area, so I don't intend to go through that in much more detail than we've already kind of flagged up. But the two things which I would emphasise are, first of all, that there is a known and acknowledged impact, and there is also a likelihood that as we discover more about that impact, it's likely to become greater, I would suggest. And related to that, there is also a really important issue in terms of the extent to which the impact is felt in a disproportionate way. So this kind of way in which the characterisation of more affluent people driving their children to school and less affluent people walking by the side and breathing the fumes. Now, there are challenges to exactly how that works in practice, but I think undoubtedly two things seem to me to be evident. One is there is a known impact in health terms, which we can quantify, and when we've attempted to do that, we've been talking nationally about things like 40,000 excess deaths per annum associated with poor air quality, or something of that order. That sounds to me like quite a big number. And there is also an issue of the equity with which the impact is felt, and which feeds into the broader kind of social context of this issue, and the extent to which this isn't just a kind of technical issue of health impact, but it's also an issue of social justice. And so what I've become very interested in, and what I want to sort of share with you in more general terms today, is the extent to which, despite what I think is strong evidence that this is an important issue where there is a known impact, that this doesn't appear to have had more traction in policy terms. And by policy, I don't mean the stated policy as it's declared, I mean the policy as it's manifested in practice. So my version of policy is how you spend your money, not what you say you're going to try and achieve. And so I think, for me, this is one of those issues which sits in the broader context of the challenge which you hear about all across the kind of health and care system, which is this notion that we have essentially, to be a slightly oversimplistic, we have essentially kind of illness service, which is focused on the treatment of illness when it takes place, but which is not good at promoting and supporting health, and as much as it's possible, preventing illness where there are opportunities to do so. And this is something which you hear about consistently, certainly across the NHS, this notion that we have to find a way to become better at preventing illness, we have to find a way to genuinely support and promote health, in the communities that people live in, and not just treat illness when it takes place, because we fear that the kind of demographics, if we just keep attempting to treat the illness which we predict the population will have, then at some stage the current model of provision that we have will not work. And that's a really, really consistent narrative, and I've heard that pretty much everywhere that I've gone in a health system. But if you kind of step back from it and kind of put in that challenge of policy is about the stuff in practice and how you actually kind of spend your money, well, there doesn't appear to me to be any really strong evidence that we actually believe that. Because in practice, the way in which, certainly within the health system, we still spend our money is focused on the provision of care for illness in big, expensive, kind of fixed settings. And I think that at the heart of that conundrum, if you like, why, despite the fact that we are talking a lot in policy service about things like prevention and about promoting and supporting health, that in practice we are still kind of locked into a model which is very much focused on the treatment of illness, and where we don't implicitly seem to value the benefits that might come from, for example, addressing those 40,000 excess deaths nationally. And part of the answer to that, I think, and this is one thing which I don't want this to sound kind of overly esoteric, but there is this kind of conceptual challenge, which I think we have to kind of acknowledge and address, which is related to the way in which policymakers make decisions about the way in which resources are allocated, and the kind of implicit theories of value, which are often personal, never stated, kind of completely embedded, which guide those decisions. So here's a little kind of illustration of what I mean by this. So I have a background as well, I say background. I got a degree in economics. I didn't become an economist, but so what I've tried to do is to think about the allocative mechanisms that guide the way in which we spend money on things like health, or choose to allocate resources to addressing issues like poor air quality. And if you just kind of dropped into the health system right now and said, is there a kind of theory of value which appears to be guiding our resource allocation that we could kind of infer based on the way in which we actually do things in practice, then I'd argue that would have kind of three components. One is it would be a very short-term understanding of value. So it appears that we're very, very concerned about the next 2 years, certainly in terms of things like financial balance within, for example, the health system. But we don't really seem to be that concerned about the next 2 decades, because we don't seem to be allocating any resources to solve challenges over that time frame. Our way of understanding, the value of resources and how they can achieve things is very much focused on activity. So, for example, I could probably find out relatively quickly how much it costs, literally to a penny, to conduct cardiac surgery. But if the question was, what would it take to reduce heart disease in South Bristol by 10%, then I would have a great difficulty saying, well, this is the resource that you need to do that, because we think about it purely in terms of resources drive activity, not resources are committed over the long term to achieve different outcomes. And then thirdly, we're very, very poor at thinking about, if you like, just from a financial perspective, we think about the bits of the system that we put the money into. So University Hospitals Bristol has this much money, North Bristol Trust has this much money, as opposed to collectively, as kind of interested participants in the place that we call Bristol, we have at our collective disposal £1.3 billion per annum, and that is about the number in terms of the overall health spend, if you interpret it in terms of the money that's allocated to organisations that are connected to health or deliver health services in some way. So that notion of a kind of system resource and using it to achieve outcomes over the longer term is something which I think we really, really struggle with. And that's a conceptual challenge in terms of people's understanding of what they're trying to achieve collectively. And my sense is that we have to find a way to interrogate that and to sort of challenge people to articulate it, because so much of it seems to me to go on in an implicit way, in an unstated way, and in a way which is based on very personal understandings of what is important. So how you break that open, I don't have a good answer to at the moment, but I think that the reason why it's relevant to issues like air quality is that those characteristics of the whole system and the way in which policymakers, in their role as allocators of resource, actually determine priorities in practice, I think that is one of the reasons why an issue like air quality, where despite the fact that you have this I think, strong evidence and growing evidence of impact, doesn't seem to have a huge amount of kind of traction in practice. So that's a, I just think that without finding a way to kind of call that out in some sense, I think that actually it's really difficult to make significant progress. And the sort of progress I'm thinking of is, in 5 years' time, if we've made progress, then instead of a tiny proportion of that 1.3 billion pounds of money which we are calling health expenditure being spent on preventative issues like addressing poor air quality, encouraging physical activity, promoting access to green space, we should be spending a much bigger slice of that. But one of the reasons why we don't is not because we don't know about the impact, it's because there is something kind of trapping us in the way we make decisions, and a fundamental part of that is the value we ascribe to outcomes associated with this sort of work as opposed to straightforwardly dealing with illness. So that's quite a big challenge, I guess, but I wanted to share that because I think it's very, very important in the broader policy context, and look forward to the discussions later on. Thank you.
And we've got Adrian Davis, who's a visiting professor at UWE, but also works for the Bristol City Council. Perhaps you can explain his
I can't even understand it. Good morning, everyone. I think what I would like to do at the end of mine, having sat and listened to Graham's and David's presentations, the last slide is an opportunity to try and bring together some things that they said, not everything, but particular points, particularly around demand management, I think are absolutely crucial to the agenda as we move forward. So I did say that, I saw it very quickly there, I said at a glance, I'm going to canter through this because of time, because I've heard some of the things from the speaker. Transport and health, I've been involved in transport and health work from the very beginning, I think, I'd like to think, since 1988. We set up the Transport and Health Study Group back in Manchester. And now the field and the science and the understanding has massively moved on, and we understand that beyond what the famous Buchanan report of 1963 talked about casualties, it talked about noise and air pollution as the three health impacts, if you like, of transport. We know that there are far more impacts that are far more nuanced and subtle, chronic long-term as well as the acute, and one of those of course, is still air pollution, but as David mentioned, there's some big numbers out there and the science has massively moved on. So there's a lot out there. I'm just going to cover a couple of these because they're important. This is one of the slides that I think is the most powerful I can ever show. So we as Homo sapiens were evolved from the plains of Africa where we were hunter-gatherers. We're still designed to be hunter-gatherers, except we go hunter-gathering in cars to Sainsbury's or what to do. We don't do physical activity. Now, if we look at what physical activity does for us, it's the best, it is the magic bullet that we often talk about in health sciences, if there is one at all. We were designed to be physically active. And what, of course, is happening is that over the years, we have reduced our physical activity massively, and inside that, if you try and understand what's been going on, of course we've mechanised much of the things we do, so we don't do manual labour much anymore, but of course we've had a mass move to motorisation and what we now call as sedentary transport. And I think it's quite important to talk about car use as sedentary transport, because you understand what it does to the body. It means you sit down, and sitting down is actually one of the things we increasingly know is really bad, even compared to standing up. So you're having a bad time at the moment, at least I'm standing, Joe's standing. Anyway, so when we look at the big picture, we often talk about systems thinking, which is increasingly getting some traction, I think. We try to think about beyond something, for example, like deaths. This is 2008, could be 2016, last set of date, but it's roughly the same. We worry about the number of people, of course, who are killed on the roads, as we should do, and what we need to do is to reduce that and try to eliminate it. But if we try and put it into a bigger picture, we just look at the diseases that are prevalent with physical inactivity, chronic heart disease, just attributable, that bar is just attributable to physical inactivity. That bar for cancer is just attributable to physical inactivity and thus for stroke. And it goes on. Chief Medical Officers talk about up to 20 diseases and conditions associated with physical inactivity. We can see there's a much, much bigger prize in terms of reducing what we call the morbidity and mortality burden of disease, deaths and illness in society if we're able to get more people physically active. So we have to think about bigger pictures. Now, clearly when we talk about air pollution, we know that it is a major concern. This is just a simple survey from Eurobarometer, getting views of EU citizens. We know that air pollution is important, along with some of the other issues that we are confronted with in transport. On air pollution, just to say the obvious things that my colleagues in the air pollution team know much more about than I do, but it does affect us in a whole host of ways. Strokes, ischemic heart disease, cancers, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, pneumonia in children, and there's other stuff besides. It's not a minor issue. We must understand the importance of air pollution, and we think about the growing lung function of children and how we've got more and more studies showing how this is effective and stunted by poor air quality. We also know the science continues to evolve, as I said at the start. We know about this issue about diesel. We've had Dieselgate. We know the lies that go on in the industry. I often will say to people that we've understood over years the role of the tobacco lobby in terms of the lies they've made over many years to deny the link between tobacco use and cancer, despite the fact that we found out in science in 1953 that tobacco causes cancer. And they've got multi-millions to try and obfuscate and hide the truth. We have the same with the road transport industry, the roads lobby, who've got multi-millions, they put car adverts everywhere, all the rest of it, and they will do the same. They're a lobby out there to deceive us of the realities of life and the illnesses, the disease burden. So we can continue to have fights with the industry about getting standards up for vehicle fleets that have anywhere near compliance with existing European standards. What we know now, of course, and have done for a few years, that diesel exhaust is carcinogen. So one of the ways that we should be moving forward is this model. We can choose any other model you like, but they all come to the same conclusion: avoid, shift, improve. This is what the World Resources Institute in the US uses. I think it's quite a nice model. So Graham talked about technology and how much can we achieve with technology, and generally literature says technology really isn't the big driver. The big driver is behaviour change, as we've also talked about. So we have technological improvements, but we also do some shifting, getting more people able to use public transport because we make it cheaper, we make it more reliable, and frequencies of services. These are the things that are important to citizens in order to use public transport, if it's there at all, given the cuts we've seen in bus use, particularly across Britain due to austerity, as the Chancellors of Exchequer recently would tell us that's what's happening. Clearly non-motorised transport is a key in urban areas for short journeys, and we still have a lot of low-hanging fruit. We can still shift a lot of journeys which are made. In the City of Bristol, we know about 44,000 vehicle trips a day, where there are short enough journeys where people could shift mode. And we know some of the barriers to those sorts of things, but there's still an opportunity to do more work there. And then there's kind of the spatial planning. And just to remind you, we are in the midst at the moment of developing a new joint spatial plan, which will be huge because it's got to accommodate the new housing developments, which will go largely around the perimeter of Bristol, which will generate more traffic demand. So there's an issue for us there, and what that will mean for air quality along with all the other aspects of road transport. So we do need some paradigm shifts. I always like using the word paradigm. Subvert the dominant paradigm is one of my mantras. So this you may have heard of in Seoul, massive change. We'd argue we really need some of these disruptors. We're now talking resilience language. We're talking about the need for disruptors. Bristol has a resilience strategy which we need to relate to the air quality issue as well. But we need some disruptors which really change the name of the game, because otherwise we're going to be stuck doing incrementalism, on some of the decision making that David was alluding to that cannot seemingly make a big enough move to a prevention model, and this, I would argue, is a prevention model. We're keeping people healthy by having some fun and some life in the city rather than the smog and the rubbish that goes with the one on the left-hand side. Just a tiny bit of science. I'm not asking you to read all this, I'm just going to explain it very briefly. We have a lot of discussions about exposure, whether it's better to be in a car or cycling or walking and all these sorts of things. In European cities, we have no real worries, particularly about reaching levels of pollution that we do in some of the Asian cities, where really being physically active at all is actually a worry, unfortunately, because the levels of pollutants are that high. So on most days, as I think Andy would tell me, we don't get any, even the worst days, we only get up to about 40, 50 micrograms, I think the word, maybe a bit higher, a little bit higher, but we're not even touching 95. So physical activity, doing it, the benefits do outweigh the health disbenefits. You might want to study those people that go around delivering food and things. I forgot what they're called now. Delivery, thank you, and because high levels of exposure. But I think even then, they would still not. The health benefits would outweigh the disbenefits. What is interesting, and what are we doing for the mayoral air pollution quality task group, is just drawing together some of the evidence that is increasingly emerging about in-vehicle exposure. The idea that if you shut your windows and all the rest of it and you crawl along in the city traffic commuting that you're somehow better protected is a complete misnomer. There is now some evidence emerging, and there was some 20 years ago when I looked at this then, that in-vehicle exposure is probably worse than outside the vehicle. You're trapped often near the centre of the road as well. So that might be an important comms message that we need to think about as we move forward. Yeah, here's some references. All those. And just to point out, because I was just showing one or two studies, the important thing that has been shown by researchers, and you can't see the detail, the important thing is this is benefits up here and that's risk at the bottom. The benefits for active travel are massively larger than the disbenefits from a whole range of studies using different methodological approaches. So we've got strong triangulation in terms of giving us confidence that it's still beneficial to be out there being physically active because of the cardiovascular benefits and probably the well-being benefits we know as well. We're just finishing a study at UWE on commuting and well-being, and not surprisingly, walking and cycling in terms of well-being always come up high in the studies. So, as WHO would tell us, these are the things we know we need to do: increase the physical activity, reduce traffic injuries, free urban roads, parking for green spaces, etc., etc. And in that mix will be, of course, an outcome will be improving air quality. As Graham alluded to, I think you were talking just about bicycle shared, bicycle schemes and others. Almost there's a trend out there, I think, that is happening despite what governments do, that people want something different which is not based around a car-centric world. So we see more car sharing, we see more complete streets, they talk about it in the United States, we have more walking and cycling, car-free zones, smart cards, bus rapid transit, as well as bike sharing. There's a lot of stuff going on out there which I think is just coming through because of demand, and this actually fits into a wider scheme of things related to what is known in literature as peak car. And peak car, which is hotly debated in the UK, not least because the Department of Transport refuses to accept it, relates to the evidence we do have that young people are turning away increasingly from car ownership and want to have good quality transit, as the literature often calls it. They want to live in urban areas with good quality transit with facilities locally based. So we are seeing some trends out there across the world which are at least encouraging for us in trying to help us achieve our aims of today of improving air quality. And then this is the slide I was thinking of at the end. So this is where we are, unfortunately. The ideological slant we have is big infrastructure, generally roads. We've got a 15 billion road programme just to spend money on until 2020 with Highways England. on a fallacious idea that will kickstart the economy, that will somehow improve air quality and all the other things. It will not. There is no evidence that it's going to do any of those things, but it's the ideology of big projects, which spans parties, apart from, of course, the Green Party that's sitting here today. But it totally really ignores, and picking up on David's point about numbers, look at how much spending goes where. We have tiny amounts of money going towards behaviour change interventions, despite the fact that we've had really good evidence from the smarter travel research over the last 15 years or so. We've just had a new report out, which DFT paid for, on cycling towns and demonstration cities, showing the effects were really significant, and if we spent that sort of small amount of money across cities for 10-year periods minimum, we could really do some of this big transformative stuff that we need to do as part of overall resilience. So it ignores the idea of demand management. It's just going for what Graham was talking about, which is predict and provide. We're back to the old pendulum of predict and provide, build more road space, where actually we need demand management and behaviour change. We need to use avoid, shift and improve. So we're in a situation where the overarching infrastructure, if you like, of government is actually sending the wrong signals, and we're trying to send, or try to work against that, if you like, to achieve important levels of behaviour change with rather small amounts of money. I think that's one of the big challenges we face. Thank you very much.
Yeah. What time? We're a bit short of time, and I know both David and Graham have to head off fairly soon. But we've got time for a few questions. If anybody's got one there. Yes. Oh, maybe if you say who you are and what organisation you're representing.
Okay, I'm Alan Morris, and I'm here representing Bristol Walking Alliance. I have a question for David. You mentioned health improvement teams. I don't think there's currently a health improvement team for air quality. Would it be a good idea if there was one? Or is that not the right solution?
Short answer is there's no reason. The health integration team model isn't a restricted model. And so if there was a community of people out there who came from the different constituencies we represented the partnership, but there was also public contribution to that, then there'd be no reason to practice why.
So on this respiratory, disease hit.
Yes, but it's not specifically.
No.
It's in the broader context of COPD rather than air quality as a particular issue. But there's no reason in practice why it couldn't be done. It's just a question of whether there's an appetite from among the partner organisations to contribute to a bit of joint working.
Anything else?
Roger Sabila, Northern Trust and Development Trust. I was wondering if Graham could say, answer a question. It's been suggested to us, seriously enough that we went away as a committee into a little bit of work on, that hydrogen is actually a genuine potential for an alternative transport system.
Yeah, so we've had this sort of stop-go thing, or between electricity and hydrogen. Essentially, you're looking for a way to carry energy, and hydrogen has some things to favour it. You could send it around the natural gas pipe network, so we have an established infrastructure. But the real problems are around compression. So you need to store the gas and compress it to a high enough pressure that you can carry enough of it for it to be useful. And there's considerable energy costs. Like the natural gas pipe network that brings gas to people's homes, I think it's about 7 bar, and you need hundreds of bar of hydrogen compression in order to carry enough of it to do anything useful. And there are arguments about the safety. I mean, yes, it's true, liquid fuels are not safe either. It's a different kind of safety problem. And it really depends around the efficiency of the fuel cell, whether that's going to beat an electric battery motor combination. Currently, it seems to me that electricity is in front in this particular technological race, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was some change on that basis. But at the moment, the emphasis is on electric power.
I was wondering if you knew anything, whether it was still being pursued.
Oh yes, it is. In fact, Toyota recently introduced to the United States market the first hydrogen-powered commercial fuel cell car. I have to say that they quickly recalled them all, I believe. But I'm not sure exactly what that was around. But yeah, so it's happening. It was also extremely expensive. There we are.
Yes. Is there anybody else who has an urgent question or before we move up? No. Okay, well, we should take Claire, so you first and then you. And then,
Okay, so.
And then we're going to move to the next one.
All right, well, I'll try then. My name's Charlie Bolton. I'm on the Green Party Council on Bristol City Council. We had a debate about clean air zones at our meeting on Tuesday night. Thus far, everybody seems to be on board, even the Tories. But I can see two problems. One is all the motorists who won't believe a word of any of this and hate people like me and probably all of us. But possibly more importantly, there's the middle-class environmentalists telling poor people what to do thing. So it's people driving cars, possibly the most polluting cars, quite possibly going to be on lower incomes, and here we are telling them what to do. And I think that's going to be, or could well be, an issue for the Labour administration in our city. So how do you get around that?
Who's asked the question?
Anyone.
Well, I think that's probably something that we can talk about in the preceding sessions. So I think that's an interesting point to raise. But yes, I mean, I think that's a significant barrier which I hope we can discuss in the next couple of hours.
Yeah, just a quick one for me for Graham, the Deputy Engineer Manager for Prestwood. We are currently looking at gas buses, as not like the gentleman said about hydrogen buses, but normal biomethane gas. Would you have any sort of thoughts on this?
Yeah, I followed your progression with that, and I think it's a very positive move given the situation of the UK bus market. James Freeman, I know, introduced that at Reading, and he wants to bring it to Bristol. I think as a next step, it's an obvious thing for the private bus company to do, and it's good that First are taking some leadership in this area. Clearly, if we were on the continent, we'd be talking about electric power. That would require a much closer public-private sector working for it to be possible. And there are now systems where you could have a central trolley bus network, but actually batteries on the buses, so that when you get to the end of the trolley network, they could run off into the suburbs. And ultimately, we need to go there.
Yeah, I think it's very relevant to what we then think we want to do. So Martin Fodder, I'm a Green Councillor on the City Council. And the institutional issues are like, we have a policy, we do the exact opposite in terms of what we spend. That's been very clear for many years. It's exactly the same in lots of other sectors. So we clear up waste, we talk about reducing it, but we spend money on clearing it up. You know, we talk about air quality and pollution being really important for all these candidates when they want to get elected, and we spend the money on building big road projects and massive infrastructure projects. Policy opposite from spending. But what also matters is who pays and who benefits. So we're talking about who's suffering from all of this. We're also talking about who might have to change their behaviour. And we seem to have certain privileged groups. So commuters really matter and get money spent on them, especially roads. And people who live by the roads don't matter and don't get money spent on them. And we've even got little subgroups like taxi drivers really matter, not the people they drive past. So we can't possibly intervene in any way that would change their job, even give them grants, because it would interfere with them. But actually we totally rely on them, and so the people by the roads that are being polluted and having their lives shortened and ended don't matter. because we're not spending money on them. So could we think about who pays and who benefits?
Yes, well, I think, yes, yeah, I think, as I said to Charlie, I think this is something, these are certainly issues to discuss over the next couple of hours in terms of what do we want? We all want a future with clean air, where everybody is living in a healthy environment, low carbon as well, to stop the impact of climate change. And how do we get there? And all these things that we're bringing up that we can talk about in the next session around the different challenges and barriers from different organisations, which is why we're here today, and how we can address those. Because yes, taxi drivers in some ways are benefiting, but then if your livelihood is dependent on taxi driving and things are introduced that then stop you from able to make your livelihood in that way or increase the cost, then that's an impact on taxi drivers. But yes, also it's impact on air pollution for the people walking along roads. So yes, I'm hoping that's something we can discuss. And I'd like to close up this session now and thank our keynote speakers for those talks. I think they were very interesting to me. Thank you for coming. And then we'll be moving through next door, the next session. So thank you.